With the dip in oil prices,
a huge shortage of foreign exchange,
and a steady decline in foreign exchange reserves, the need to diversify the Nigerian government's source of revenue beyond oil is more urgent than ever before. On
the show, Nigeria Going Beyond Oil, we bring you reports on the efforts of the Nigerian government to explore alternative sources of revenue as it de-emphasizes its historical reliance on oil. I'm Wale Famrewa.
And I'm Onyi Sunday. Join us as we explore this new strategy aimed at growing Nigeria's economy.
In our first report, I spoke to a range of experts about Nigeria's economic challenges and the evolution of non-oil revenues as a critical element in the government's revenue-raising initiatives going forward. Take a look. For decades, Nigeria has been an important oil producer, contributing over 2 million barrels a day of crude to global oil supply. The country's abundant oil resources have led many to classify the country as an oil economy. But is this classification justified? A deeper look at Nigeria's oil wealth compared to the country's population tells a different story.
When you look at oil per person, it's not. You look at the Gulf countries and they're exporting 300, 400, 500 barrels of oil per 1,000 people every day. Nigeria exports 12, not 300, not 400. And that 12 means that Nigeria will never be rich on the back of oil. It needs to diversify, it needs to broaden what it does.
The rebasing of Nigeria's GDP in 2014 revealed the diversity of economic activity in the country. The GDP data report for the first quarter of this year shows that the oil sector only accounts for 10.3% of GDP, compared to almost 90% for the non-oil economy, which includes 20.5% for agriculture, 21.5% for trade, and just under 12% for ICT. But the government's focus on oil over the last 4 decades has had a significant impact on government revenues.
In the early 70s, it used to be that 80% of government revenue was coming from non-oil, and only 20% were coming from oil. The problem became the fact that we took our eyes off everything else because it was easy money flowing from the ground. And then you fast forward to about 10, 15 years after that, and then it was the direct opposite. So oil revenue became 80%, non-oil became 20%. If you rely on a commodity that you cannot control the price, it's not a good thing for anybody. It's too much uncertainty. Because we have this very sharp decline in the price of crude oil over a very short period of time is the reason why we are today almost in a crisis situation that we have to address.
Indeed, the recent decline in oil prices has exposed structural weaknesses in Nigeria's economy and government revenues. Petroleum profit taxes due to the government are down 58% from 3.1 trillion naira in 2011 to 1.3 trillion in 2015. That number is expected to fall even further this year. Total government tax revenues over the period fell 19.2% to 3.7 trillion naira, but only because non-oil tax revenues rose 58% to 2.5 trillion.
At the federal government level alone, 3 trillion in a year. Now we're down to 820 billion. Even the 820 billion now, we have to pray and hope that we even reach that target. Because not only is price a challenge for crude oil, volume has gone down significantly.
I knew right from the outset that if we don't have the kind of situation that the crash in the crude oil prices had forced Nigeria to enter, we wouldn't take tax revenue generation or non-oil revenue generation seriously.
The informal sector is huge. According to the NBS, Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, so you have the largest, so it's almost 40% or more. And in terms of employment, over 20 million small businesses and organizations all over the place, employing 1, 2, 3 people. So it's huge. But the tax contribution is very low. In my estimation, I would say the tax contribution from the informal sector is under 2%.
Nigeria's current economic challenges have generated fresh calls for the government to lead efforts to reset the economy. Oil revenues are currently insufficient to meet the needs of the country's large population. It's time for Nigeria to fulfill the potential of the economy by driving the growth of the non-oil sector, as done by similar oil-producing countries.
When I look at countries that export as much oil per person as Nigeria, the country that strikes me as most interesting is Mexico. Mexico exports about 7 barrels per 1,000 people. Nigeria does about 12, far different from the hundreds that you see in the Gulf. And Mexico has managed to diversify. And it started in the 70s with oil and agriculture. And Nigeria should certainly be doing agriculture now in a bigger way. And President Buhari is trying to do that.
The Nigerian government's plan to reset the economy includes exploring the increased potential to raise taxes. It will also try to block leakages in the current tax system. It's a task made more difficult by a culture where the people expect to receive social services for free or at subsidized rates.
We had wallowed in a culture of entitlement. We had wallowed in a lot of ignorance around how public finance works. And the government has not helped that mentality by showing itself off as a government that can provide everything.
There's been a lot of talk as to who has the largest economy, whether it's South Africa or Nigeria. Now, if you compare their own tax position with Nigeria, I think they focused on it a bit earlier than we did. And so they're certainly ahead of us. If you look for figures, South Africa will be saying they're about maybe 21 or 22% tax revenue to GDP, while we are not up to 15.
You have over 37 million, small, medium enterprises that are operating in the Nigeria's business environment, and a significant number of them are not even registered with the tax authorities. Now, out of over 2 million companies that are registered at the CAC, we understand that only about 400,000 are probably registered with the FRS, and only less than 200,000 are paying their taxes regularly. You have a huge gap between what is potentially collectible and what is being collected.
Nigeria is a heavily import-dependent country. We import almost everything, from services to goods to even refined products. Now, you would then expect that on import duties and VAT on importation should be significant. We should not be talking about customs generating 800 billion, 900 billion in a year. That should be a tiny fraction of what they generate. Now, I think some of the issues we've had in the past that we're hoping that now will be addressed is the fact that on one hand, we have some policy inconsistencies. Sometimes you see government will say, we're giving waiver for this, waiver for that. That is not really driven by any macroeconomic policy or objectives. And one thing about, people is they then abuse the process because there's something to gain from it.
A lot of organizations collected VAT from consumers without remitting same to governments. A lot of companies who were allowed to do what we call a self-assessment, present their own financials, presented wrong financials. And we're looking into all of that. So we're going to start comprehensive audits in certain sectors and make sure that we correct those leakages.
The drive to address revenue leakages and to expand the tax net is led by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Early reviews of the efforts made so far have been mixed.
The progress we have seen is, first, we're seeing more engagement. And also we're seeing a government who wants to try and understand what the issues are, even though we also like for government to move more quickly. So it will mean that, because at the end of the day, people would only be able to pay taxes when they are successful. To become successful, a lot of that will have to be with support of government. Government has to create the right environment, the right framework, I know that we're always in a hurry, but these things take time. Tax awareness, tax education is very low in Nigeria. Even people who are highly educated, they just don't know anything about tax. And most times they don't even care, right? So because of that, you find that if you compare Nigeria with other countries, say South Africa, say Kenya, say even Ghana there, let alone going to Europe, going to the US, we're very different in that sense that because of the little attention we pay to tax matter, that in itself leads to the fact that compliance rate is very low. And to some extent also, people justify this even though it's not a reason not to pay tax. People say they do not see taxpayers' money put into work.
There are so many people who are engaging in significant commercial transactions in this country that are not paying the right taxes. So there is need for the government and the FRS to pursue an accelerated expansion of the tax net. Some did not make it, I mean, they were not profitable between the first 3 or 5 years of their business. But right now, they are earning billions. And they are concerned that if they should disclose themselves to the tax authorities will want to collect significant penalties and interest, which in their own view could be huge or damage their business. So that is why we have also canvassed that government should look into a kind of specialized modified amnesty program for potentially taxable persons who find themselves not being compliant, not by reason of a deliberate attempt not to be compliant, not by reason of a design to avoid or evade taxes, but innocently.
The crash in oil prices has left Nigeria reeling under the pressure of a sharp drop in government oil revenues. But given the size and diversity of the economy, the government of Africa's most populated country has an enormous potential to raise non-oil revenues by improving tax collection and blocking leakages. The Federal Inland Revenue Service will play a key role in the process designed to get the country back on the path of growth and prosperity. The calls are loud and urgent. Kicking the can down the road will only make things worse. It's indeed time for Nigeria to move beyond oil.
But Wale, what are the key takeaways from that report?
Well, I do get the sense that it's on the front burner now, but we have a really long way to go. But the potential is huge. It's quite evident that so many people are out of the tax net in Nigeria. So many people need to get into that tax net. And once the government finds a way to make that happen, it's really incredible the impact that tax revenues can have on the government's fiscal situation. As we know, the oil price decline has really exposed Nigeria significantly. We'll find out whether or not they're able to achieve that.
Interesting, Wale. Well, Nigeria going beyond oil returns shortly. Do stay with us.